The first sign was a post-it note, yellow, stuck to the corner of my monitor on a Tuesday morning in March. Tyler's handwriting, I recognized it by then. The blocky capitals he used, like someone who learned to print from a business textbook. It said, Rescheduled to Straplin. Strategy planning, my weekly call with the Whitmore account. Rescheduled, by Tyler, who was not the account lead, who had not asked me, who had been with the company for 7 months. I peeled the note off, held it, set it down on the desk. Then I went to the kitchen, made my coffee in the plain blue mug I've had since 1998, and came back and started reading my emails. That was March. What happened in April is the part I want to tell you about. The conference room is down the hall from my office. Third door on the left, the one with the glass panel. I built that room. Not literally the contractor built it, but I chose the table, chose the chairs, chose the print on the wall, which is a photograph I took in Edinburgh the summer after I landed my 5th client. I was 33 years old, and it felt like the whole thing was real for the first time. On the second Thursday of April, I was walking down that hallway at 10:40 in the morning with a cup of coffee and some contracts to review after a call. Through the glass panel, I could see people were already in the meeting. That wasn't unusual. Kevin had morning calls sometimes. What made me stop was the voice, Tyler's voice, carrying through the glass and the door. What we've been building here is a methodology that didn't exist before. This isn't just traditional PR. It's a full relational positioning framework. Kevin and I have been refining it over the last several months. I stopped walking. Through the glass, I could see the side of David Whitmore's face. David Whitmore, my first client, my 1,998 client. The man who, 25 years ago, called me back after I'd left 3 voicemails and said I don't usually take chances on new agencies, but something about you seems real. David Whitmore was sitting at my table, in my conference room, listening to Tyler Briggs explain a methodology I developed over 2 decades. Kevin was beside him, nodding. Then David asked, "How does Sandra fit into all this now?" "I haven't heard much from her side," and Tyler said, "and I want to be very precise here because I have replayed this in my head many times," Tyler said. "Sandra's transitioning into more of an advisory capacity. There have been some health considerations. We're being respectful of that." Health considerations. I was standing in my own hallway, holding a cup of coffee, completely healthy, watching a man I'd hired 7 months ago tell my oldest client that I was stepping back due to health considerations. Kevin said nothing. That's not accurate. Not Sandra's here today, actually. Nothing. He turned a page on his notepad and drew a small arrow beside something. I looked at the print on the wall. Edinburgh, 1,994. Gray sky, the castle in the background, taken at an angle because I was trying to get both the building and the street. I turned around. I walked back to my office. I sat down. I picked up my blue coffee mug. I set it back down without drinking from it. And I thought, right, let's see what else you've done. I want to tell you about Marsh Communications before I tell you what came next, because context matters here, and I'm not interested in telling a story where I'm the flawless heroine and everybody else is a cartoon. I started the company at 36. My husband Malcolm had left 18 months earlier, not dramatically, not with a fight, just the slow geological drift of 2 people whose lives had grown in different directions until there wasn't enough overlap left to keep trying. We were decent to each other about it. We still are. Kevin was 9. I was already doing freelance communications work, enough to feel like it could be a company if I ran toward it, instead of treating it as supplementary income. So I ran toward it. The early years are genuinely not interesting to narrate. They were coffee and invoices and cold calls, and the particular exhaustion of building something without anyone else's belief to borrow until you've earned your own. I took on clients I wasn't sure about and lost some and kept some. I hired my first employee in 2001, a woman named Carol who is still with me, who has seen everything, and who communicates primarily through a very precise system of pauses and a specific type of silence she deploys when I am making a mistake. Carol is 54. She has a daughter who is doing a PhD in environmental science. Her car is a 14-year-old Volkswagen she refers to as the Ambassador. She makes the second best shortbread I have ever eaten and has never explained how. By 2010, we had 12 employees, a stable client list, and a reputation in our city that meant I was getting referred rather than having to hunt. That's the threshold. Before the threshold, every new client is a battle. After it, new clients start calling you. I had spent 14 years earning that threshold. Kevin graduated in 2014. He'd done an undergraduate in business with a minor in communications, and he came to me in his final year and asked whether he could come work with me after graduation. We talked about it seriously. I did not offer him a job because he was my son. I told him specifically that I wouldn't do that. I told him he'd need to interview, and he'd need to come in at an entry-level position and be assessed the same way anyone else would be. He interviewed. He was good. He was actually better than I'd expected, sharp in client strategy, willing to do the unglamorous work of building relationships from the ground up. I hired him. 3 years in, he was an account director. 5 years in, he was managing our largest client cluster. He'd earned that. I need to say that clearly because of what comes later. Kevin had earned his position. He was not a passenger who I'd promoted out of sentiment. He was genuinely good at his job. He was also, I came to understand, someone who was easier to influence than I'd realized. Not weak, exactly. More, he liked harmony. He liked problems to resolve. He would accept a version of events that let everyone feel okay, rather than push on the version that was accurate. I recognized this because I had some of it in me once, before Marsh Communications taught me that ambiguity is not kindness. Ambiguity is just postponed conflict with interest. Tyler Briggs arrived in August of last year. Kevin brought him up in the spring. They'd been at business school together, not close during school. They'd reconnected at a reunion the previous autumn. Tyler had spent several years in a large consulting firm, then a startup that hadn't worked out, and he was looking for something where he could make a meaningful impact. Kevin said he thought Tyler could be useful as we were trying to scale. I said I'd meet with him. Tyler was, and I want to be fair, presentable in a meeting. He spoke well. He asked good questions. He had a particular way of leaning forward when someone was talking that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room, which I recognized immediately as a trained behavior but acknowledged was effective. He dressed in the specific way men who take themselves seriously dress, not flashy, but deliberately not ordinary. I had questions. His work history had some gaps. The startup, when I asked about it, he described in terms that were vague in a specific way. Lots of process, no numbers. I pressed once. He deflected smoothly, and I let it go because I was busy, and Kevin was vouching for him, and I thought we could structure the role tightly enough that it didn't matter. I offered him a 6-month contract as project lead. Not COO, project lead. He accepted. By October, he had introduced himself to clients as COO. I found out through an email chain I was CC'd on, where a client referred to him by that title, and when I asked Kevin about it, Kevin said, he just felt like the title better reflected what he was actually doing. I didn't think you'd mind. I should have said something then that was more than, let's tighten up the title definitions. That was October. By April, he was telling David Whitmore I had health considerations. I have been asked, since all of this, why I didn't act immediately, why I went back to my office and sat down, why I spent 3 more weeks in that building watching things I now know were happening. The honest answer is that I needed to know how much. Walking into that conference room and confronting Tyler in front of David Whitmore would have resolved one incident. It would also have given Tyler the opportunity to shape the narrative of what came next. I overreacted. I was erratic. I embarrassed the company. I had no documentation. I had one overheard conversation and a growing unease that I had not yet traced back to its roots. I needed to know the roots. So I went back to my office. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, the one with the lock I'd had installed when I moved in and had never actually used because I'd never had reason to, and I took out a lined notebook, plain cover, bought from the pharmacy down the road, the kind that doesn't look important, and I started writing things down. The notebook filled faster than I expected. I started with what I'd seen and heard, the posted in March, the overheard meeting in April. Then I went back further, through emails, through calendar entries, through the particular texture of the last 8 months that I had been interpreting as normal and was now reinterpreting. There was the reorganization of the shared drive in December, which Tyler had described as making things more accessible. When I actually mapped it, certain client strategy documents, the ones with the most history, the ones with my original frameworks, had been moved into folders under his name, not deleted, moved. There was the company website update in February, which Tyler had handled. My photograph and biography still appeared. But if you click through to the Our Team page, the listed specialties under my name were founder, industry advisory, brand heritage. Tyler's listed specialties were strategic development, client growth, organizational leadership. Kevin's were account management, creative strategy, brand heritage. They had made me the museum piece in my own company. There was the LinkedIn post from January that I remembered vaguely. Tyler had said he wanted to do some content to build the company's profile. I'd said fine without reading it carefully. When I went back and read it now, proud to be helping Marsh Communications evolve its approach for a new era of communications. With fresh thinking and a commitment to genuine client relationships, which have always been at the heart of what this company does, we're excited about what's next. Fresh thinking. What's next? I wrote it all down. Then I asked Carol to help me. I want to pause here to tell you about Carol, because Carol is important to this story in a specific way. Carol Hargreaves joined me in 2001 when she was 32, and I had 4 employees and an office above a dry cleaning business. She has been my PA, my institutional memory, my first reader, and the person who noticed in 2009 that a client was going to move their account 3 weeks before they called to tell me, because she had registered a change in the length of their emails and the frequency of their queries, and concluded, accurately, that they were already emotionally halfway out the door. Carol doesn't say much. When she says something, it means something. The week after the conference room, I asked Carol to come into my office and close the door, and I told her what I'd heard. I didn't tell her everything I'd been documenting. I said, I need to understand what's been happening in client communications while I was focused on the Hendrix project. There was a pause. Carol has several pauses. This one was the specific pause she uses when she's deciding how honest to be. Then she said, I can pull together a summary of outgoing client correspondence for the last 6 months, if that would help. It would. I'll have it to you tomorrow morning. She stood up. Then she stopped at the door, and without turning around, she said, the Whitmore meeting is not the only one. Then she left. The summary arrived at 7:45 the next morning, before anyone else was in the building. It was 23 pages. I read it at my desk with the door closed and the plain blue mug empty beside me. The summary showed that over a 6-month period, Tyler had conducted 17 client-facing communications calls, meetings, emails for which I had no record and had not been included. In 9 of those, he had described himself as the primary strategic lead. In 4, Kevin had been present and had not corrected this characterization. In 2, Tyler had referenced my health. In 1, a call with a smaller client from October, he had said, Sandra is taking some time to focus on her well-being. The day-to-day is fully in hand with our team. My well-being. I closed the summary. I looked at the print on my wall, the Edinburgh photograph, which was still in its place on my wall because my office was the one room in the building Tyler hadn't reorganized. I thought about how I had chosen that photograph because of how I felt when I took it. 33 years old, 5th client, the whole thing feeling real for the first time. I thought about David Whitmore's face in that conference room. Then I opened my laptop and looked up the current status of the company's shareholder agreement. I had not looked at the shareholder agreement in 18 months. That was a mistake, and I want to own it plainly. The reason I hadn't looked at it was that I trusted Kevin, and I had been so focused on a large project that had taken most of my attention for the better part of a year that I had taken my eye off the internal structures. That was on me. Not entirely on me. What Tyler did was not caused by my inattention, but the gap he walked through was a gap I had left. The shareholder agreement had been amended in November. I was still majority shareholder, 60%. Kevin held 25%. What had changed was that Tyler had been granted a 5% equity stake, a figure that, on its own, I could accept as a reasonable incentive structure for a senior hire. The thing that stopped my breath was the clause attached to it. The clause designated Tyler as executive director with signatory authority over operational decisions not exceeding £50,000 in value, subject to majority shareholder approval, except in cases of time-sensitive operational necessity. Time-sensitive operational necessity. That phrase is a door. It's the kind of door that looks like a formality and functions as a bypass. Kevin had authorized the amendment. His signature was on it. Mine was not, but under the existing articles, Kevin's authority as named director was sufficient for internal amendments below a certain financial threshold. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called my solicitor. Her name is Patricia Caldwell. She had been working with me on business matters for 11 years. She was calm, precise, and allergic to unnecessary drama, which I appreciated. I told her what I'd found. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. "The clause is valid," she said. "Under your current articles, Kevin had the authority to grant it. However, the signatory authority is conditional on majority shareholder approval, except in time-sensitive operational necessity. That exception is undefined in your articles, which means any specific instance of Tyler exercising it without your approval would be open to challenge on the grounds that the necessity wasn't documented. Has he been exercising it?" Another pause. "That's what we need to find out. Do you have access to the operational account statements?" I did. I pulled up 18 months of statements while Patricia was on the phone. There were 14 transactions over £5,000 that bore Tyler's authorization stamp and did not have my counter-signature. 3 were above £25,000. None had documented justification for the time-sensitive exception. "Sandra," Patricia said carefully, "what is it you actually want to achieve here?" I looked at the Edinburgh photograph on my wall. I thought about the blue mug. I thought about the post-it note in March. "I want my company back," I said. "I want him gone, properly and legally, with a paper trail that makes it impossible for him to claim credit for anything that belongs to this business. And I want to do it in a way that doesn't burn Kevin down with him, because Kevin is my son, and he was manipulated too, even if he should have caught it." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, "How much time do you need?" 3 weeks. "What happens in 3 weeks?" "There's a partners meeting scheduled. We have them quarterly. I want to add a formal board review to the agenda, and I want to invite David Whitmore as an advisory stakeholder in the context of his contract renewal." "Why Whitmore?" "Because Tyler has been lying to him about me specifically, and I want it to come out in a room with a record." Patricia was quiet long enough that I wondered if I'd lost the connection. Then she said, "I'll have draft documents to you by Monday." The 3 weeks before the partners meeting were the most deliberate weeks I have spent in 22 years of running this company. I want to be precise about what I did, because some of it sounds simple and none of it was easy. And the difficulty wasn't practical, it was psychological. It required me to be present in a building where things were wrong, to sit in meetings and answer questions normally, to walk past the conference room with the glass panel every morning and not show what I knew on my face. I'm not a woman who performs well without purpose. I've never been good at waiting. This was different. This was preparation. The first thing I did was contact David Whitmore, not through the company account. From my personal email, the one that predates the company, the one I've had since before broadband was reliable, the one with a slightly embarrassing early internet address that David has known for 20 years and would immediately recognize. I said, "David, I'd like to talk before the renewal call. Nothing alarming. Just want to catch up properly. Would you have 20 minutes this week?" He replied within an hour. "I've been wondering when you'd get in touch. Tuesday at 4 works." We spoke on Tuesday. I did not tell him what I'd discovered. I asked him how the company had been feeling to him lately, how the work was landing. He was careful. David is always careful. He's been in business long enough to know how conversations can be used, but after about 10 minutes, he said, "Sandra, if I ask you something directly, will you answer me directly?" "Yes." "Is there something I should know about your health?" The word health landed in the room between us. "I'm perfectly well," I said. "Who told you otherwise?" A pause. Tyler mentioned, a few months back, some health considerations. "He was quite concerned about you." "I appreciate the concern," I said. "The concern isn't warranted. I'll explain everything properly at the renewal meeting." I'm planning to make it a formal board review. I'd like to invite you as an advisory stakeholder if you're willing. It'll be a chance to get proper records in order. Another pause. Then, I'll be there. Something in his voice had changed. Not toward me, away from something else. I ended the call and wrote the date in the notebook. The second thing I did involved the shared drive. I did not move anything. I did not delete anything. I simply created a parallel structure, personal copies of the foundational methodology documents, the frameworks I had developed over 22 years, with creation dates that predated Tyler's arrival by, in some cases, 15 years. I copied them to a personal encrypted drive and sent copies to Patricia. Then I spoke to my IT contractor, a man named Simon, who has serviced our systems for 9 years and communicates almost entirely in understatements. Simon, I said, I'd like to understand who currently has administrative access to our client database and when that access was granted. Simon consulted something. Then, Tyler Briggs was added as a secondary admin in September. Kevin authorized it. And who was primary admin before that? You were. And who is primary admin now? A pause. Also, Tyler. I looked at my hands on the desk. Can you restore me to primary admin and shift Tyler to view-only access by end of today? That's straightforward. Do you want me to notify anyone? No, I said. Just do it quietly. He did. Tyler didn't notice for 4 days, at which point he sent me an email asking if there had been a system update, framed as a technical question. I replied that I was reviewing access protocols and would update him after the partners' meeting. He said, "Of course, no problem at all." He did not say it again. The third thing was the hardest. I had to talk to Kevin. Not the full conversation that would come later, but I needed to have a conversation that told him something without showing my hand, because I needed Kevin in that partners' meeting without Tyler having prepared him for what was coming. I asked Kevin to lunch. We went to the Italian place around the corner that we've been going to since he was 12, and I would bring him to the office on school holidays, and he would sit at the spare desk and draw elaborate battle scenes in the margins of my unused notepads. We ate. We talked about normal things, his running training, a holiday he was planning, a client win he was proud of. I asked good questions and meant them. Then, toward the end, I said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you brought Tyler in, what did you imagine the company looking like in 3 years?" He thought about it. "Kevin is, whatever else, someone who takes questions seriously." He said, "Bigger, more structured, like we'd actually built proper systems." "And my role?" He looked at his pasta. "I thought you'd be more free, less day-to-day. You've been doing everything for 22 years. Did anyone ask me what I wanted?" He looked up. "Kevin, did anyone ask me what I wanted?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "No, I suppose we didn't." We paid the bill and walked back to the office, not saying very much. At the door, Kevin stopped and said, "Mom, is something going on?" I looked at him. At the face I have known since before it had its current shape. At the man who, for all his misjudgment, had genuinely believed he was helping me. "There's a board review at the partners' meeting," I said. "Read the agenda properly before you come in." I went upstairs. The fourth thing I did was put the Edinburgh photograph back on the wall of the conference room. Tyler had moved it to a storage cupboard in January, along with several other items he'd considered visual clutter. I went to the cupboard in the evening after everyone had left. I found the frame, dusted it off, carried it into the conference room, and rehung it in the spot I'd originally chosen for it, the exact spot I'd marked it years ago with a tiny pencil X that was still there behind the mounting bracket. I stood back and looked at it. Gray sky, the castle, the angle I'd chosen because I wanted the building and the street both in frame. I turned off the conference room light and went home. The partners' meeting was on a Tuesday. David Whitmore arrived first, 10 minutes early. I met him in reception, shook his hand, and he held it a beat, longer than the occasion called for, and said, "Good to see you looking well, Sandra." I said, "Thank you, David." We understood each other. Tyler arrived precisely on time, which was his habit. He was wearing his good suit, the dark charcoal one he wore for important client meetings. He'd dressed for an audience. When he saw David, his face moved through surprise, and then recovered into a practiced warmth that I have learned to identify as performance. David, good to see you. We didn't know you'd be joining us. Sandra invited me, David said pleasantly. As an advisory stakeholder for the contract renewal, I believe she mentioned it. Tyler looked at me. I smiled. I included it in the revised agenda last Wednesday. Should be in your inbox. Kevin arrived a few minutes later. He read the room when he walked in. He's always been able to read rooms, and something shifted in his face that I couldn't quite interpret. He sat down. He didn't look at Tyler. We started with the formal business items, financials, staffing, the Hendricks project update. Then we reached agenda item 6, board review, company structure, authority parameters, and title designations, I said. For the record, I've asked Patricia Caldwell to join us remotely for this portion. Patricia appeared on the screen at the end of the table. Tyler looked at the screen, then at me. His composure was still there. I'll give him that his composure held longer than I expected. Patricia opened with the documents, shareholder structure, the November amendment, the operational authority clause. She said, "The clause designating Mr. Briggs as executive director includes signatory authority over operational decisions not exceeding £50,000, subject to certain exceptions. I'd like to review with the group how that authority has been exercised over the past 6 months." She listed the 14 transactions. Tyler said, "The time-sensitive exception applied in all of those cases. I can document the reasoning." Patricia said, "That's precisely what we'd like to see. For the record today, could you confirm your current title and the date it was formalized?" Executive Director. November. The company's public materials currently list you as COO. Could you clarify when that title was adopted and who authorized it? A pause. I may have used that term informally. For how long? Tyler looked at me. I did not look away. Several months, he said. David cleared his throat. If I may, when Tyler and I spoke in February, he described his role as Chief Operating Officer. He also indicated that Sandra was transitioning to an advisory position due to health considerations. I'd like to understand how that description came about. The room was very quiet. Tyler said, "I was characterizing the situation as I understood it at the time," Kevin said. "What does that mean, Tyler?" Tyler looked at him. "Kevin, what does, as I understood it, mean? What did you understand?" The composure started to go. Not all at once in layers, like paint in cold weather. "I thought the direction of travel was clear," Tyler said. Sandra stepping back, the two of us running the operational side. "Kevin, you said yourself that—" "I said I thought she'd be less hands-on eventually. That's not the same thing." Kevin's voice had gone very flat. "I didn't tell you to tell clients she had health problems. I didn't tell you to tell anyone that. It was a framing. It was a lie," Kevin said, "about my mother. To a client." The word landed and didn't move. David said quietly, "Sandra, I owe you an apology. I took that information at face value and I shouldn't have. I should have called you directly. You're calling me now," I said. "That's what matters." Tyler left the company on a Thursday, 11 days after the partners' meeting. The exit agreement was handled by Patricia. It took 4 days to negotiate, primarily because Tyler's initial position was that his equity stake entitled him to certain ongoing considerations. Patricia's position, laid out in a 14-page document with attached evidence, was that his exercise of unilateral signatory authority without documented justification constituted a breach of the authority parameters he'd been granted, and that his public misrepresentation of his title and of my health to clients constituted reputational damage to the company, and that if he preferred to take the equity argument to litigation, she was prepared for that conversation. His solicitor replied the following morning. Tyler accepted a buyout of his equity at the original grant value, not current market value, which was considerably higher given the work the company had done. He signed a non-disparagement agreement. He provided, in writing, a list of every client communication in which he had represented his title inaccurately or described my health status without authorization. The list had 21 entries. I read it once, folded it, and put it in the bottom of the notebook. The conversation with Kevin happened on a Sunday, not in the office. At my house, in the kitchen, the way conversations that matter have always happened in this family. He came with a bag of groceries because he didn't know what else to do with his hands, which is something he has done since he was a teenager. He made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. He stood with his back to the counter. He said, "I didn't know about the health thing." "I know you didn't." I knew he was ambitious. I thought that was useful. It was, up to a point. He was quiet for a while. Then, "I should have asked you more." "Yes." I thought I was helping. I looked at him. At the 32-year-old man who has been in my life since before I knew what kind of life I was going to have. "Kevin, I know you thought you were helping. I know you love me, and I know you were trying to build something good. And I also need you to understand that helping, that doesn't include the person being helped, is not actually helping. That's deciding for someone. Those are different things." He nodded. He didn't argue, which told me he'd been sitting with it for days. "Where does that leave us?" he said. "With the company." I had thought about this carefully. I had written it out in the notebook, and crossed it out and written it out again. "I'd like us to do this properly," I said. "A formal partnership agreement. Your 25% stays. Your title is Managing Director earned, with defined responsibilities and review periods. No ambiguity. No informal arrangements that turn into something else. And your role? I'm still majority shareholder and founder. That doesn't change. But I'm also coming back to the client work, fully, not as heritage and advisory, as the person who built those relationships, and is the best person to keep them." He looked at his tea. "You'd be working for your own company again." "I never stopped," I said. "The question is whether everyone else catches up." He put the mug down on the counter, looked out the window at the garden for a long time. Then he said, "I'll sign whatever you need." That was 7 months ago. The company is, by most measures, in the best shape it's been in 3 years. We brought back 2 clients who had drifted toward competitors while Tyler was managing the relationship. David Whitmore extended our contract by 2 years and requested that I personally lead the account review. No handoffs, no intermediaries. I said yes. Carol has not changed. She still communicates in pauses and her specific silences. On the Friday after Tyler left, she placed a coffee on my desk, the plain blue mug, freshly washed, which she had evidently retrieved from wherever it had migrated to during the previous months, and said, "I thought you'd want this back." I said, "Thank you, Carol." She nodded and left. Kevin and I are navigating something that doesn't have a clean name. Not estrangement. We have lunch on Thursdays. We talk about work. We laugh sometimes. We are learning how to be in a business together as 2 adults with defined roles and honest terms. Some weeks it feels easy. Some weeks there's a weight to it that I don't think goes away, because I know that in a room with his friend and his good intentions and his desire to solve things, he was quiet when I needed someone to speak up, and he knows that I know. We are building something on top of that fact, rather than under it. I don't know yet what we're building. I think that's all right. The Edinburgh photograph is back on the conference room wall. Nobody has mentioned it. The Edinburgh photograph was always there, in fact. Tyler moved it for 7 months, and it felt like an absence I couldn't exactly locate. Now it's back, and the room is just the room again. On the first morning of this month, I came in early 6:50, before anyone else, the specific gray September quiet of a building before it fills with people. I made coffee in the kitchen. I carried it to my office. I set it down on my desk, in the space between the keyboard and the photograph of Kevin when he was 7, the one where he is wearing a hard hat that's too big for him on a site visit I brought him to once because I didn't have childcare, and a client thought it was wonderful. I sat down. I put both hands around the plain blue mug. I thought about 22 years, about what a company is made of, which is not the brand or the documents or the equity percentages. It's every relationship built slowly over time, every phone call returned, every time you stayed honest when a softer version of the truth would have been easier and would have cost you later. I thought about the post-it note in March. Tyler's blocky capitals. Restjeweled to Straplin. T. I thought about the moment I walked back down the hallway from that conference room door. The moment I decided not to walk in. I thought, right, let's see what else you've done. And I thought, this was never really about Tyler. Tyler was a symptom. He walked through a door that shouldn't have been open, and the reason it was open was that I had stopped paying attention to it. That was a lesson I needed, even though the lesson cost more than it should have. The question I'm still sitting with is, what does a company become after something like this? Not the legal structure, not the client list, not the partnership agreement. What becomes of the daily texture of a place where trust was tested and partially broke and is being rebuilt in pieces? I don't know the answer to that yet. I'm still finding out. The morning light came through the window over the hydrangeas. Somewhere down the hall, the elevator opened. Carol arrived at 7, as she always does. She put her head in and said, "Whitmore's called ahead. He'd like to push the 10 o'clock to 10:30 if that suits." "Fine," I said. "That's fine." She nodded and disappeared. I picked up the blue mug and finally took a sip of the coffee I'd made 20 minutes ago and let go cold. It was exactly right. If you've ever watched someone walk through a door you left open and had to sit with the question of which part of that was on you, I think you understand something this story is actually about. It's not about the villain who leaves. It's about what you do differently with the door.